Hi, and thank you for joining me today for another lesson of Unity from scratch. This is part 1 of the Parallax Effect series, where we explore the different ways to achieve a parallax effect in a 2D game. So, without further ado, let's begin. So before we can begin, we need to download some graphics to show how the parallax effect works. So let's go into Google and search for free game parallax graphics. That should give us something. Royalty free is good. Yeah, that looks great. See, there's 3 parallax backgrounds. Add to cart. Now let's see in their free stuff if they have anything else, because we need a sprite. Yeah, that looks also great, so I'll add that to the cart as well. And let's check out. So we'll just create a quick account. And place order. Okay, to download it, we can go to our mail or just go to our account, and we'll see in the orders maybe. Yeah, we have one download for the backgrounds and one download for the art. Great. So let's create folders to save them here. Call it Sprites. Let's create another folder called background, and another one called player. So let's get our graphics. Let's select the daylight one, the parallax. The artist has very conveniently broken up the different parts of the background into different PNGs, which is exactly what we need. So we'll just select them all and drag them into the backgrounds folder. And for the player, there are characters. There's a wizard. Let's see the wizard. Okay, for the player, we won't pick. There's a lot of options here, but we don't need them all. We just need a player so we can see it moving a little bit. So we'll pick, let's say this one, and where's the another one? This one. No, this one. And we'll create an animation from these two. Very simple animation. Okay, so now we're ready to start the different types of parallax effect. So the first parallax effect that we want to do is the simplest one. It involves an illusion of the character moving by actually keeping it in place and moving the background to the left. So let's go into our background, and you'll notice here that we'll have 2 of each, So let's get rid of one of them. Great, so now we're only left with the Full HD one, and we'll drag, you see this is the furthest background, we'll drag it into the scene, and the rest we'll drag under it one by one. We do it one by one because if we'll drag them all at the same time, Unity will think that we want to create an animation. Now, as you can see, they are not sorted in the right order, so we'll give each one an ordering layer. We'll tell it to go to -5, which means furthest away. This will be -4. This will be -3, -2, and -1. Great. Next, we'll want to create our player. So we'll go to the player, drag the first one into our scene. We'll move it. It's tiny, so let's make it bigger. And it's a little pixelated, but it will do just fine to what we need here. Next, we want to create a simple animation for it. So we'll just drag these two sprites under it and create a new folder for the animation. And we'll call it Wizard Walking. Or actually, running. Great, so now we have our wizard, and it has a sprite renderer and an animator. And if we'll just hit play, it's running. Great. Next thing we want to do is we want to move the backgrounds to the left while keeping the player in the same position. In order to do that, we'll need to create a script. So let's go to our assets, create a new folder called scripts, and let's create a script called moving background. We'll double click it and it's open in Visual Studio. We have two functions here, the start function, which is called when the scene loads, and the update function that is called for every frame. We'll need two things here in order to move the background. The first thing, and the most obvious one, is the speed. So we'll create a public float variable called speed and give it a default value of 5. We'll make it public so we can control it from the Unity interface. The second thing that we need is a rigid body. In our case, rigid body 2D. The rigid body is a component that will attach to the background, and it will allow that component to interact with the physics system of Unity. In our case, we'll want to give it speed. So in order to give it speed, we'll have to allow it to interact with the world. To get the rigid body, we'll just find the component by using the getComponent function. hand, since we want to move the background right from the start, we can actually give it its speed right away. Speed is described by two parameters in 2D, which means the speed on the x-axis and the speed on the y-axis. So we want to move it only on the x-axis, so it will be speed times -1 because we want to move it to the left. On the right, on the y-axis, we don't want to move it at all, so it will be 0. We'll save it. Now let's go back to Unity. And here we need to do two things. The first one is create a rigid body for the parent background. So pick rigid body 2D. And the second thing is that we need to attach the script to this object. So it's called moving background. Great, and you can see the default value of 5 for the speed. Next, we'll hit play and see what happens. So as you can see, on one hand, the background moved to the left, but on the other hand, it fell down. That's because the physics system now affects the background and all its children. To prevent that, we'll need to add a constraint to the rigid body and tell it to freeze the position on the y-axis. Let's try it again. Great. So now the background moves to the left, but at some point it leaves our camera and our character seems to move off the platform. First, let's change the name to background. Next, let's duplicate the whole group of backgrounds. And last, let's move the new group to the right. This has to align just right. Great. So now, if we push play and move to the scene, we'll see that the background actually moves and our character stays in place. Great. So now for the last part. For the last part, we need to modify our script. This way, when our character moves off one part of the background into the other part of the background, we'll just move it and put it here, just in front of the character. Let's do it. We'll go back to our script. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to calculate the width of the background. So let's make a variable to save that width. We'll call it background width. Oh, it's a float. And to calculate the background width, we need to use the sprite renderer. The sprite renderer is this component, which actually draws the background on the screen. So the sprite renderer really knows what's the width of the sprite that it's drawing. Okay, so let's take the sprite renderer. We'll do get component. And now that we have the renderer, we can get the width from it. Great. Last, we need to move the background to its new location. So let's create a function. And what we need to do is change the position of the object. To do that, we'll just move this part of the object, which is the transform, which determines the position, the rotation, and the scale of our object. So we'll do transform, position, and we just want to move its X position. So the new position is the position of the transform now. Plus twice the size of the transform. So, or the sprite. 2 times the background width. And we want to keep the position on the y-axis, so it's just transform the position y. Finally, we need to understand when to call move background. We'll do that once the background leaves the camera view. This means that we need to call it once the background has moved at least the distance equal or greater than its own size. So we'll do if transform position x. If the current position of the transform is smaller than its width, then we'll just call move background. We need to make one small correction here because we are testing the position on positive values. This means we're testing it if the position of the background is to the right of the character, but we want to test it if it's to the left of the character, so it's going to be minus background width. So let's save it and test it. And we can see the character is moving and new background is created. We can see a little bit of blue here. This means that the camera is actually bigger than the size of our background. We can see it here more clearly. So let's fix that. We'll just make the camera a little bit smaller. And test again. Perfect. Now it seems that our character is running endlessly. But actually it's staying in its place and the background is moving alongside it. But we said we want a parallax effect. So what do? Actually, it's pretty simple. All we need to do is give each part of the background a different speed. At the moment, each background is moving as part of the parent background. But now we want each part to be independent. We'll start by creating a new background object. And this time we'll drag all of these backgrounds into our new background and put this one is here as well. If you remember, this one was layer number 5, which means the orange part of the background. So let's change it back to layer number 5. Great. And now we want to attach the script that layer number 5 has to all the rest of the backgrounds. So let's select all of them and moving background script. And like this background has a rigid body, all of these will have to have a rigid body as well. And we'll have to freeze their position too. So now they're exactly the same as layer number 5. We'll delete the duplication and create a new duplication. And move it to its new location, like we did before. Great. Let's test it. Okay. So all we have left, the only thing we have left to do is give different speeds to different parts. The furthest background needs to move slow, while the one that is nearest to us needs to move fast. So let's give it a speed of 0.5, and to this one let's do 1, 1.5, 2, and since the trees are moving with the ground, so they need to have the same speed. Now it would have been wiser just to duplicate this once we've made the changes, so let's delete this one and duplicate it again, just easier, and quickly move it here. And let's see. And as you can see, the trees are moving with the ground at the same speed, but the mountains, the clouds, and the stars are all moving in different speeds. If we'll go to the scene, we'll see that each part is moving in a different speed, but handles its own when it needs to duplicate itself to be in front of the camera. This wraps it up for the first part of the parallax effect. In the next part, we're going to do a parallax effect where the character is actually moving and the background needs to adjust itself in order to create the effect. I hope you enjoyed it and join me soon at the next chapter.